All right, good morning, Kerbonauts. This is Scarecrow71. I am recording once again the Ask Me Anything session. This time we have Dakota, Nerdy Mike, and Shana Markstrom. Hope I pronounced her name right. I believe we're going to get started here at about 10 o'clock, which is another 60 seconds or so. So enjoy a little bit of silence and enjoy the show.
All right. Can you guys hear me okay? No? Oh, good. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I am joined here today with Shana Markstrom. How are we doing? I'm good. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. I'm very excited for us to hold this special AMA where we're going to get to know Shana a little bit more and talk a little bit about KSP2. I think we're having some microphone issues. We're working through, though. It's okay. We'll get there just a second. I might have stepped on the cord. As long as we start within 5 minutes, we're not technically late. That's the rule I like to run with. So I feel good about that. Coda's on the case, though. We're confident we're going to get through this. He's also saying sorry. I know we checked the mics like 3 times. It's super. It's just a typical fashion. It's okay. I still feel like I might have broke it. I couldn't figure out how to make mine work. No, we're not muted. We're about to share a microphone in a second, though. Be best friends. Give me just a second, folks. I'll be right back. I'm gonna hop up to try and make sure that I didn't pull the cord out here.
Hello.
And
Hello.
magic. We got
Hello?
it to work.
Okay. Hello. Okay.
That is not Shana, though.
Enough of me. Okay.
There we go.
All right, let's wiggle it around. Things look okay. Do I sound like a human being, not a lizard?
Sounds just like you. We're perfect. I turned the voice recording off.
Fantastic.
Perfect. All right. Well, we'll start this over. We'll try this one more time. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I am joined today with Shana. Now that we're made through our technical difficulties.
Howdy.
If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Shana, I don't know if many of the community have seen you yet.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Shana Markstrom. I am the design director here at Intercept. I also serve as the lead designer for Kerbal Space Program 2. I've been in the industry I have to gauge this by how old my cat is. It'll be 18 years this year. Run through a variety of companies, including Treyarch, Gas Powered Games, and Wargaming. Came here to Kerbal about 3 years ago. I get to gauge that by how old my daughter is. And I'm really excited to be able to sit here and talk to y'all today and answer some questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today. And with no further ado here, I'll kind of jump into some of the questions.
Sure.
Our first one here is from the Discord user enjoyer. What is a design director?
It's a great question. So a design director is somebody who is responsible for the standards and practices and excellence of a particular discipline. So in my case, I would be the person overseeing all designers over here at Intercept. I'm also responsible for making sure that the designers here have the room to learn and grow and explore their passions and become better game designers every day.
Awesome. We definitely see that every day, and I hope the community sees it as well. Our next one here is from user Epic on the Discord.
Mhm.
What has been your favorite thing to work on so far?
Oh, what is my favorite thing to work on so far? Uh, you know, I think the VAB has been one of my favorite pieces. It's that builder covers really a whole lot of functionality, and when you look at it and just kind of like spend day by day just trying to go through your basic builds, there's a lot of like cool moments in there where you can find things that help new players understand how to build and fly and like what's available to them. And at the same time, that kind of exploring that kind of design space gives the opportunity for more expert players to kind of shortcut and get to the things that they care about faster. And so that's one of those moments of design where you get like a win-win on both ends, and it makes me feel really cool.
Well, that's awesome. I definitely can see that. Jumping to the next one here, we have from that one guy on the Discord. What is the planet you are most proud of that we have not seen?
Oh, I think it is for me. It's Glumo, which is it's a Saturn like planet in another star system. I'm a sucker for rings, and there are some really beautiful like shots that we had as we've been exploring that place. That just it feels so nice to be there.
Sounds like I need to join some of these play tests and actually test some of this stuff out too myself here. Well, our next one here is from Little 908. This is from the forums.
Okay.
What is your favorite celestial body in Kerbal?
That one's easy. It's Eve. It's beautiful. It's haunting, and also once you're there, you're never going back.
Solid choice and reasoning. Cool. Our next one here is from user Starhawk on the forums. What has been the process of bringing a solid gameplay foundation, player progression, and KSP2?
Sure. So when we're talking about player progression, uh, in the end, you're looking for really like what's the for any sort of game you're trying to think about like what are things that I want you to do, and then how does progression help give you both implicit and explicit goals in order to be able to perform that. So when you look at something like science or resources, those tend to be a bit implicit in what they're doing. They're just like, hey, I do want to progress along this tree, but I got a lot of ways in order to do this, and no one's directly telling you like, hey, go perform experiments here, guys. And so it's kind of an implicit thing, and that's I think like out of those two kinds of systems, the one that's a better fit for Kerbal and this particular player base that does like to experiment and explore and kind of just see what's going on. At the same time, explicit goals not only give like immediate things for folks, they're also really great for newer players who are just trying to figure out what is this game about? What can I do? It also helps, I think, more mid-range players. If your explicit goals allow you to explore things that are a little off of the main path, to say like, hey, these are some other things for you to consider as well, which is also a really great goal for Kerbal, because this is a game that, while we say it's about rocketry, you do so many things in this game.
Definitely, yeah, that is true. Our next one here comes from K Create on the Discord. What's the team's approach to converging on a design choice? I'm sure not everybody on the team agrees to how every system/mechanic is going to work. How does the team eventually reach a point that everyone is happy with?
This question is really like, how does designer design? When I go mentor others, this is usually the question that comes up is like, how do I navigate a conflict? How do we come to an agreement across multiple people who have different opinions about like what are you trying to do? And really, when it comes to design, like those differences are all subjective, and so it's like you and I could come at a particular problem with different ideas, and they can both be valid. And so where we begin is that designers develop an agreement on the basics on like what is the game we're making, who are we making this game for, and that kind of becomes the common ground for everybody to advocate for particular solutions. The other part of this, I'm a fan of improv. I took a course for it. There's two big lessons that come out of that, which is yes and, which is you're not necessarily here to negate somebody else's opinion. You're there to be able to build something, and hopefully the two of you get to build something better than either one of you could have done alone. And the other one is make the other guy look good. And again, it's those two pieces kind of help build trust across the design team and build that openness, and also kind of build that it's like I'm not here with my solution and you're here with your solution. It's we're both working together to find out what's the best path for the game we're making and for the players that we have.
Definitely, we see that every day with the team. It's great to hear it. Our next one here comes from user Leroy Jenkins from the forums. How do you and the team learn about and imitate real-world rocket and spacecraft systems to ensure the realism of the game?
As a WoW player, good name, but also like there's a lot to this. So we have a handful of subject matter experts. There's Dr. Yuri Shumlak over at the University of Washington. He's the person that we tend to talk to when it comes to propulsion systems. We also have a handful of subject matter experts, particularly when it comes to colonies and celestial bodies. So we do have outside sources that we do consult. Internally, like we're reading white papers, and we have our own subject matter experts in house as well. When I initially joined the project, I knew Nate Simpson as that guy who had a metallic hydrogen white paper taped on his wall. And I was like, oh, this is what I've come into. But on top of that, there's Shalma who has a background in astrophysics. Even on the design team, we have Chris Adderley who has a background in aerospace. And so this game's kind of a rare intersection opportunity where you're not necessarily dealing with game designers all the time. You're dealing with game designers and people who are really passionate about aerospace, and you all get to kind of like jam together and learn off of each other.
Definitely unique. I've definitely learned a lot from everybody here. Our next one here comes from Brad Taniguchi on the Discord.
Mm-hmm.
What was the most difficult decision thus far with designing the game? Alternatively, what was the easiest?
So I can answer both of these. The most difficult one, I think, was establishing the roadmap. So we started from an endpoint. We're like, here's the game as a whole. But when you go into early access, it's not like, oh, I'm going to put all of these things, at like 50% at once. You're having to think about like, how do you build your foundation, and then for like each step, how do you continue to build the game in such a way that it's cohesive and enjoyable? And that took us months to sort out. And you still like have moments where you're like, are you really sure you want to put this one into this part of the roadmap? Can we move it sooner? Do you want to move it later? Like, there's always a little bit of wiggle that's going on. But like bar none, like trying to think about how to take this absolute behemoth of a game and kind of like parse it out so that every time that we release something, players go, yeah, this is rad and I love where you're going. Super, super complicated to do. Easiest one, this was actually, this is a super fiddly fine-tune answer. It's sorting parts by type as a default within the VAB. When we initially started, we sorted by size by default. But it was still causing some difficulty for people to figure out, like, well, where is this specific thing that I happen to be looking for? And then once we got sorting by type in, and we were doing more build playtests in-house, basically the art team rose up as one voice and said, can you just make that the default? And it's like, yeah, sure, let's go.
Fair enough. Our next one here is from Vicky211 on the Discord. What is the most important change in KSP2 from KSP1 that you feel is overlooked by the community?
Ugh. Or I don't know if it's overlooked as much as it's small, and it's all the little pieces that lead to approachability, that lead to more people coming in and exploring. It's moving away from opaqueness, where it's just like, oh, I hope you remembered this one fiddly piece over here, or else your day is ruined. Like, you want players to come in, try, fail, learn, try again, probably fail again, but keep that loop going. And that doesn't happen if your game doesn't give players the information and the guidance that they need in order to make those better decisions. And that's a real tough thing to do when you're also dealing with a complicated topic, which is rocketry and orbital dynamics and aerospace. And so, like, you don't want to run away and make that part any easier. So you've got to find a way how to, like, guide players into making, good decisions and, the game session length that they've got.
Definitely. I know I fail enough times till I figure it out, so that's good. Our next one here is from user Vortigaunt on the Discord. Most players don't know how to do reentry and land precisely. How will you teach players to land precisely near colony to deliver resources there? Or will we get instruments to predict landing sites for delivery path?
Oh, there's a lot of stuff going on in there. First off, the tutorial suite that we do have in place is basically the beginning of that suite. Something that we look at for every release is just like, what more can we add in here? And that includes things like reentry, and that's not only like, atmospheric reentry where you get to happily use parachutes as your answer, but also, like, hey, how do you land on the mun, guys? That's something that is, I think, old hat for a lot of us, but is something new for people to figure out, particularly like, what numbers do I happen to be looking for whenever I'm doing this? Precision landing, I think, is another one of those, and certainly when colonies appear, that skill becomes immensely useful. We have our writer, Jim Peck, did a handful of knowledge shares across the team, and one of the ones he did was precision landing, and it really was like, we recorded that as like, oh, here's like this bevy of information to think about, because he's a very thorough thinker and a very thorough explainer as well. And so when we get into something like precision landing, we've got the wealth of information internally to be able to, like, distill that and hopefully teach that to the community.
He definitely has a lot of knowledge. He's taught us a few things. Our next one here is from user the Tunnel from the forums.
Yeah.
How long does it take to design a real world technology for Kerbal technology and still be realistic? I love all that you do. The game looks amazing.
Man, it really depends. It depends on the part. It depends on the complexity of the part. It depends on, like, any sort of historical knowledge that you happen to have. I know that there are some parts right now that have a pretty fast turnaround that we're working on. But whenever you're working on something like an engine, or you're going to do, like, here's a suite of parts, you really do have to, like, take your time thinking, like, going through what's the reality of this, and then going, well, like, okay, so that's the reality of this. What gameplay considerations do I want somebody to have when they're using these parts? What am I enabling them to do? What am I challenging them to do? And can I do that in a way to where they quickly understand what's going on and what they're being expected to do in order to use this thing? And then from there we go into, like, well, okay, gameplay wise, this makes sense. We know the user story surrounding using this. We know that this is a part that is relevant and that we want to bring in, and then we'll start doing additional research. We'll do white boxes. We'll hash out, like, do we need to do a new part module in order to account for this new functionality? Do we get to use existing part modules? So the process really changes, but usually, like, the more a thing does, the more complicated more complicated and the longer it takes.
Got it. Fair. Our next one here is from user I don't know how to forum from the forums.
Fantastic.
What are your goals with regards to balance for these new technologies? Is the intent for late game parts to essentially replace early parts? or for lower tech solutions to still be viable and necessary in the late game?
That's an excellent question. So I think some of this is going to have like a mode-based answer for this. When you're looking at raw power, I mean, eventually, and certainly our hope as people is that some technologies will beat others out, like cars will beat out horses. When you're looking at just like raw numbers, you will see pretty much like straight replacements for things. But when you're looking at something like exploration, where suddenly, in order to build somewhere, you need to have the resources to be able to build the thing that you're looking for. That gives us an additional lever to make those older technologies still relevant, because perhaps those resources are more prevalent where you are.
Got it. Our next one here is from user, I want to say Cyclic from the Discord. Hi, Shana. I was wondering how the KSP team balances the stats of parts. KSP has many parts that aren't exact recreations of real rocket parts or future technologies that don't exist yet. Determining what stats like thrust pulse should be sounds like a lot more involved than looking it up on Google. Could you give an overview of the process the team uses to determine the stats for, say, a metallic hydrogen engine?
Sure. And hi, Cyclic. So whenever we look at we're going to introduce new parts, we'll group parts into certain stories and goals, and that helps us set guidelines for overall behaviors, and that basically like sets our basics. So for example, you could look at like I'm going to deviate from metallic hydrogen because there's a lot more variables involved in there. But I'll talk about like command parts. So like a pod versus a lander versus a cupola. And it's like those three types of parts all have distinct stories that they have. They're used in particular goals. And so once you have an agreement on like these are the types of parts and these are the goals that these types of parts should have, you get to start looking at like, well, these are the variables that we can tweak. And then you can start to set guidelines for this. So you can say like, well, okay, maybe command pods have a better heat tolerance than landers. Maybe landers have more capacity for EC and monoprop, because they're usually detached from a rocket at some point, and so they need that extra storage. And so you get those guidelines in place, and then you start to derive formulas from it to be able to consistently apply that. And then once you've got all that together, you start reviewing your data against your known factors. And so like going back into engines, you may go like, well, okay, how long does it take you to be able to perform this mission? Or, can this engine actually handle this particular flight profile? How heavy is this? Does it have enough thrust to where, the fuel that it needs is going to be, like, can anything even lift off of the ground? Or, you could say like, well, no, it doesn't have to do that, but the intent of this is to be built at an orbital colony, and so the profiles around building this thing in the first place are wildly different. It's a crazy number of variables, particularly for the engine sheet. Chris Adderley, I think, has like 3 or so engine balance sheets that you look at, and you just keep kind of like you're sort of like best fit guessing, but at the same time, particularly when you're talking about near future technologies or things that don't necessarily have like an analog in like a true analog in reality, you do get to like fudge a little to basically go like, well, what's the player's goal for using this thing?
Got it. It's a lot. All right. We have one from a user from the Discord here, Bacat.
Mhm.
Are new planets scale more scientifically accurate, or have you kept the 6 size for gameplay reasons?
That is very strictly, we kept the 6 scale size for gameplay reasons. Like, there's not too much to really get into this. It's just like, if you do blow up the size, and I think you do vastly change the experience between the 2 games, and that's a very hard square to circle for a sequel.
Definitely. Our next one here is from a user on the Reddit, the Homeless Man 0.
Okay.
Will there be any additional things do or challenges on planets like wildlife, exploring cave systems, weather, etc.?
Man, there's like all of those examples there, certainly things that we've talked about. And if we talk about wildlife, then like Paul Zimmer will barge into this room and tell me like, you need to listen to me and read this document right now. But the things that are happening immediately is going to be science mode. Science mode is one of those first times where it's like, all right, here's a there's a design kind of terminology thing in place where there's a toy, which is basically like here's a bunch of things that you can do. And when you have a game, when it's like here's a bunch of things you can do and here's a goal. So science mode is the first time where we get to like take this toy into a game. And there's like the implicit drivers of like I need to progress through tech tree, I need to perform experiments, I need to fly missions to distant places in order to get all of that. But it's also the first time that we're introducing missions, and unlike KSP1, we're looking at doing bespoke missions, and so we're taking a look at like what's really cool about the celestial body, what's really cool about this particular type of flight profile, or like what's something that we do in reality that we can spark curiosity about in KSP2. And you can build missions that kind of guide players into seeing like this is not only what you can do within the game, but it's also these are things that we're grappling with as humans.
Got it. Our next one here is a user from the Discord. I want bread. Will there be incentive to go to other planets in the future, like special resources or things like the Monarch?
Short answer, yes. And I think it's just an extension of it's an extension of the previous question. So, like I said, science is about performing experiments at locations. Exploration is when resources come in. And then, things like the Monarch are strange locations, right? Surely we'll do something with them.
Our next one here is a user from the Discord, Christoph.
Mhm.
Will previous science parts from KSP1 be in KSP2?
Parts will be different between the two games. This is one of the things that we explored as we were going through, like what are our plans for science mode, what was working, what can be improved, what kind of stories do we want to tell across science parts. And so in this case, the design team really hit on making sure that science parts are kind of focused on their own particular like building and flying and usage challenges. And so you'll see less, let me put a thermometer radially on my command pod and just so I'm able to perform this experiment. It's more like I've got this weird bulbous thing that performs an experiment, and I got to figure out how to build a rocket around this. We wanted to make sure every science there are some science parts where this is an easier question of like how do I build and fly around this, but there are some that are pretty out there. But in the end, the common thread across science is that these experiments have they have a common core in reality. They relate to experiments and information that we care about in learning about just like what is going on with another planet, what are its challenges, what are its uses.
Got it. On here we have one from the forums user Astro Guy. How will the resources be distributed across so many planets in order to give the player a reason to explore every world? If resources aren't the catalyst for exploration, how else do you plan on motivating exploration?
So I think there's a belief that, there's when you look at like, okay, I need resources and I need players to go and explore every planet as a result of that. Like there's like a very easy answer that you hit on where you're like, well, okay, every planet needs a different resource, right? And that's like, yes, that's an answer. But it kind of gates players into like they must do this or else they will not proceed, and that's certainly not a thing we want to do. We don't want to be prescriptive to the player and tell you hey, no matter what, you got to go to every single place even if you don't like it. So resources are not like every planet has its own particular resource. It's also not like true to reality either. Instead, we're looking at like what sort of resources happen to sit on this planet and how are they useful to your program. And that becomes very relevant when you start dealing with like exploration mode plus colonies, where you're able to build at different locations. And so you may choose to build like a mining colony at one place because you're like, I don't want to build here because it's really obnoxious to fly from here, but it has a resource that I really need. And so you may build like a terrestrial mining colony that schleps its resources up to an orbital colony, and that's where you're doing your real like building and flying business. But again, we're talking about resources. There are still other systems in place to be able to guide players into where they want to go. And for the science release, it is explicitly like performing experiments at locations and additionally performing missions that will take you to these places.
That brings me joy. And the next one here from Discord user CVUSMO. I can't pronounce that. Sorry, I don't know if that's the acronym. With resource management, are the resources we gather raw materials that need to be converted into usable resources? Will we need to build a refinery system?
So short answer is yes, you're going to gather raw resources and then you're going to refine them into what you need. Chris Adderley had a lot of fun making this production chain graph. I am hoping we as we get to do that release, that maybe we get to release that particular chart, because it's very helpful in kind of piecing together like how does everything flow into everything.
Definitely to see about doing that. Our next one here is a user from the Discord, Tycho. When it comes to resource systems, how many resources do you eventually decide to settle on, or are they still working on settling on? Should we expect something like one unique resource per celestial body?
Answered this a little bit previously, but to give a little more of a specific number, I think we're sitting on like 14 or 15 particular resources that can be found towards the universe, and it really is like the focus tends to be more on like what does a celestial body have to offer in terms of propulsion, but there's also some other pieces there for like wanting to build specific like non-engine or non-fuel parts. So the same resource can be present in multiple locations, but the prevalence of it or the proximity to your existing infrastructure are big factors into choosing like where are you building and where are you gathering.
It's like a lot of exploration to be had. Our next one here is from user on the Discord, Arthur Snow. In the previous AMA, it got said that colonies will be built using resources, but the resource gathering update comes after the colonies one. How will that work?
Yeah, this is one of those edge case moments where, remember when we talked about like what's one of the most difficult decisions you had to make, and it's about this roadmap. This is one of those edge case moments that appeared as we were breaking out features on the roadmap. So exploration does have to wrestle with resources. Sandbox and science mode will not have to do that. And that's kind of the short piece to it. We wanted to make sure that exploration was about that kind of that additional piece. But yeah, that.
Totally fair. Let's look forward to. Our next one here is from Reddit user Master of Rodentia. Will there be an equivalent to the mobile processing unit in science mode? Why or why not?
The answer here is no. We want to focus on the core experience of science. So what's this core gameplay loop of like, I need to fly a mission in order to earn science. So I need to have experiments on hand, and I need to go to a location, and then I either need to transmit or recover those reports in order to score science. And so that's like the basic loop of it. And because we're not like one-to-one cribbing off of KSP1 in this case, we want to make sure that the core loop is solid before we start adding parts that happen to break that loop.
That's totally fair. Next one here is from a user on the Discord, Calm. At the moment in KSP2 and KSP1, activating time warp halts all craft rotation. Was there any consideration given to making rotation persist through time warp? Is this something that we'll see in a future update?
Yeah, and I fully understand that time warp under Acceleration's current implementation makes long distance missions still pretty difficult to do. this one is something that we tend to consistently talk about. So I can't say when, but I can say, hey, we're talking about it.
Talking about it. Next one here is from a user on the Discord. Booyahs? Sorry. Will we get more clues or backstory to the Kerbals, the Kraken, or Easter eggs around the Kerbolar system?
Absolutely. Kerbal is a very interesting bit of lore building where I liken it to like you would see something from a FromSoft game where it's not like I'm going to sit here and have a dialogue with you and tell you everything that's going on, but there's kind of this environmental storytelling. There's these moments where like if you're looking at parts, you can start to learn a little bit about like manufacturers and things that they care about, or like weird little pieces of history that occur. And I think that continues not only as we continue to add new parts and we start talking adding more celestial bodies, but also particularly when we start adding missions, particularly those that will get you looking at some of those Easter eggs.
Got it. Okay. Our next one here is from a user on the Discord, Link12313. Are there plans to add the claw and asteroids into KSP2?
Absolutely. That question is like, what release does that best slot into?
Got it. Our next one here is from a Discord user, Space Nerd 1235. Will the rover cockpit get new modules?
Nate Simpson, if you're listening to this right now, can we have more of these? There's a parts artist on the team, Jonathan Cooper, who was kind of my touchstone as I was performing wheel tuning because he was super into making cars and rovers. And like he's made some really sweet things. He's made a Batmobile. I'm super into it. I want more cars. I want more rovers.
Well, I hope Nate's listening. I'm sure he is somewhere looking at this going, oh, here now another meeting about this one. Our next one's from a forum user, No Kerbal Sky 08. Will there be slightly more advanced tutorials, like going to other planets? Because I'm pretty new. So far, the tutorials from KSP2 have been the easiest to understand.
I'm super glad that KSP2's tutorials are getting you up and flying. And absolutely, we want to continue building on these tutorials. Things that we know that we have in the wings, landing, interplanetary travel, like basic troubleshooting, like, hey, if your rocket's doing this, maybe you should be looking here instead. Planes docking, when colonies in Interstellar come up, they'll wind up having their own tutorial pieces as well, because there are things that we want to make sure that there are skills that we want to make sure that players feel comfortable about before they try to do it in their own game.
We love the animation on those too, right? Our next one's from a Discord user, Bacat. Are variants of engines and tanks like KSP1 planned?
This is another one of those topics that comes up pretty frequently. So there's always like the question of like, is a variant strong enough to be able to be made into its own part? And when that happens, we'll easily like break it out and say like, well, okay, this thing and its variant are now two parts. But there's still like I would like to do it just, like a straight visual variant or something like that. So that topic still comes up. It likely wouldn't appear in the same form as it does in KSP1, but active talks.
Right. Our next one is from Reddit user Combat Pigeon 96. Well, I used that. I straight face. No laughing.
Rad.
Will we get part size categories larger than 5mm parts? It's like 7.5M, and will the 1.875M parts be making from the Making History DLC make a return?
Not fully sure on the Making History DLC part of it, but on the other end of this about larger part categories, 100%. You'll likely see this appear when we start talking about Interstellar, because those engines are gigantic.
That is true. So this next one here is from Discord user L. Are there plans to increase the complexity, fidelity, variety of volumetric clouds in future updates?
That, alongside its performance, is a pretty frequent, I would say, weekly conversation. we are continuing to work on this.
Hear that? We love clouds here too. The next one is from a Discord user, King Martin. Will there be scaling like wings now for other parts?
So yes, there's we call these procedural parts, where it's not like you bring it in and it just comes in as one shape and that's all you care about. There's a little bit of tweaking to it. I think the next procedural part suite that we've got coming up is for radiators. So you may see that around the time that heat as a system makes its return. And this is one of those topics where, as we look around and we see like, oh, there's a ton of parts that are like this. They're relatively like they're either like they're relatively samey, and we want to cut down on the sort of paralysis in the parts picker where you're looking at like 30 versions of this thing and going, what the hell is happening? But radiators and wings have that additional factor where that shape does a lot towards your aerodynamic profile and also towards like really what their job is supposed to be. And so that hits the really sweet spot. And like those are the kinds of parts where you go like 100% that has to be a procedural part.
Got it. Makes sense. The next one here is from user J Clovis on the Discord. Alternate atmospheric engines, referring back to Eve. Will we have engines that can run on other atmospheric gases without a need for oxygen? Will we be able to collect gases from an atmosphere as part of the resource harvesting system?
So not using oxygen for I guess like your intake air is something that we would want to put through its paces for authenticity and gameplay value. So it's like, is this a thing that we do or could do? And then like what do we get out of this? Are we just making like one-off parts at this point, which tends to be something you want to avoid, or does it really kind of like open the field up towards like a whole new suite of parts and things for players to be able to explore? That's kind of like the beginning part of that kind of conversation. I'll write it down in my book to start thinking about. On the other part, though, there's a lot of good things in the atmosphere. There's a lot of things you want to learn about in the atmosphere. So I would be ready for Kerbals to start giving them some more attention.
Sounds fun to me. Next one here is from Discord user Gil.
Mhm.
Do you plan on adding first-person EVA so that we can see the true scale of our Kraken inducing heaps of metal?
I had not thought about this. I am not going to promise this. That feels like that's an interesting addition. Hey, community, how y'all feel about that?
I guess we'll have to get some answers here. I'll check this out after we're done. Next one here is from Discord user Acid Burn.
Mhm.
Will colonies feature automation gameplay within the colony? So not the delivery route system. It can look something like 1. Resource extractor building mines a raw resource. 2. Resource refinery building makes a usable material out of it. 3. Assembly.
Okay. So yeah. There's a colony dev blog I did like a long time ago. There are still some like core pieces of that are important to keep in mind. The biggest one is that KSP2 is a game that is about building and flying cool rockets, and so that does mean that we don't want somebody to go, man, I want to go in and play KSP and I want to fly a mission to Duna, and then the first thing they have to do is spend 30 minutes doing overhead for their colonies instead of doing the thing that they intended to do. So like that's kind of the scaffolding for me saying like, yes, there's a fair amount of automation in place for colonies because we do not want colonies to be the thing that interrupts the core experience for the players. What can my colony do is a manual action. We want players to be able to decide like, what is the purpose of this particular colony? And it's similar to rockets, is by, snapping pieces together to have that sort of functionality. But otherwise, like once things are up and running, we try to skew to automation to let players focus on the part of the game that is really important to us, which is rockets.
Like a good time to me. Our next one here is from forum user Angelo Kerman. With interstellar technologies and travel on the roadmap, is relativity a thing for in KSP2? Will KSP2 handle time dilation effects while traveling at high velocities to the target star system?
Nate talks about this a few times in the pits, and it's always a terrifying discussion when it occurs. I've got no other comment.
Fair enough. Our next one here is from Discord user Play Sue. What new fuel types will be available throughout early access, and will different biomes on planets yield different fuel types?
So I think one of the first big propulsion types that's going to come in is nuclear based. I think there's I think it's split up into two particular types, but as it comes to like resources and biomes, for some reason Kerbin's not a hotbed for uranium. That's one of those pieces we do know about our resource mapping for exploration. And so for y'all who choose to play in exploration, that's probably about the first time you need to look outside of Kerbin in order to get the things you need.
Got it. All right. Next one here is from Discord user Nova Raptor.
Mhm.
Considering recent events, will we be getting more parts based off Starship, such as grid fins? And what about telescopic landing legs like Falcon 9?
First off, incredibly relevant question in more ways than one. So Tuesday, the internal design channel on Slack got lit up by Chris, given a couple of gridfin white boxes. He's like, "Hey, can you check out the shapes of these? Can you look at like the scale of these?" And so like we're coming together as a group, going like, "Okay, mostly it's about like what's the size of this thing versus the size of the thing that it's attached to." Tends to be like the big thing that all of us were looking at. It's like, do we have the right number and right sizes of grid fins in order to kind of meet player story needs? There's also like an additional piece in there where you're looking at it. Like I posed a question to Chris. I'm like, "Hey, I have absolutely no opinion about this either way, but why did you choose flat over curved?" And I may not have like a big opinion about this because I'm looking and going like, it's not necessarily like a big gameplay driver. But Chris comes in there with like, he's like, "I have reasons for this. These are my opinions about it." And it's like that kind of like spicy design chat is what I love to see. So yeah, expect grid fins.
All right. We all love hearing from Chris on these things. It's always fun. This next one is from Discord user Cheetah Gamer 587.
Mhm.
Is there a possibility that we'll see the paw part action windows returning?
Sure. So folks are familiar with the part action window, which is the KSP1. Basically, like let me click on a thing and let me see everything this part does. For KSP2, we unified this as the part action manager. The heart of that decision is in accessibility. So the part action window tends to be based on like I need to be able to right click on this thing, which can be very difficult for certain people to do. And it can be very difficult for even people who do not have any sort of disability to be able to do, depending on like the size of what you're looking at versus what you're trying to click on. But absolutely, it's got its own clear faults and challenges as well. This is a frequent conversation topic with the UX group.
Got it. All right. Our next one here is from Discord user Tatao03. If you can tell us, will stuff be before crewed in the tech tree? So are the first missions in science mode more likely going to be uncrewed or crewed?
So I'll start by saying that there's like two cool points here. One, Kerbals are not people. Two, when we were hiring for a writer, this is exactly the question that I asked them. It's not necessarily not exactly this question, but mostly it was hey, if you look at the tech tree for Kerbal 1, crewed pods appear before probes. Narratively, tell me why. And it was one of those like I really want to see in the moment. Do you know how to take like this kind of like weird kind of like realistically janky bit and kind of turn it into like, well, Kerbal lore. Why did Kerbals happen to do this?
That's a good one. I might not have been hired for that role. Our next one here is from Discord user Sam Retro. Very much looking forward to the prospect of colonies. Will adding our orbital colonies be similar to how we already make space stations, etc., or will it work differently?
It will work differently. Orbital colonies basically follow the same flow that terrestrial colonies do, and so you'll have the same tool set that you would for both of those cases.
Right. Our next one is from Discord user Chair. Will there be procedural trusses?
Like in talking about procedural wings and eventually like radiators. I look at the truss section and I go, man, that's a lot of trusses. And so that's possibly a topic to bring up of like, do we want to collapse that part suite in some way? And if we do, then that they would become procedural at that point.
Right. Our next one here is from Discord user KCreate.
Mhm.
Will there be dedicated parts for building boats and submarines? Underwater bases? Question mark.
Underwater bases scares me a little, but we 100% want to support boats. And that's not only because, KSP1 has a lot of really sweet boat content, which was certainly not expected. And we want to continue to allow that. But there's also some celestial bodies and other star systems that have some cool bodies of water of their own. And so maybe that topic comes up when we start talking about those celestial bodies again.
Yeah, we're always listening to your feedback. And our last question here is from Discord user Sunny54Games.
Mhm.
Is the team at IG/PD happy with the current state of the game?
So yes, we got something that we're proud of out into the community. We no longer have to like hide in the shadows anymore. We get to have very clear conversations like the ones that we're having right now, where we get to come in here and say like, hey, this is from our knowledge, this is what we think this experience is. Does that jive with you? And particularly for an absolutely massive sandbox like Kerbal, a team can rarely hit all of those points, and so being able to have the community as now a touchstone for feedback is gigantic, and we wouldn't be able to do that unless we were out. So we learn a lot of lessons on our way to early access. The team's kind of realigning itself to be able to focus on features. We're in here for the long haul. We are just as excited to be able to execute on this roadmap as we are to see y'all play it. And that has to happen from a very healthy spot. Like we don't want to sit here and say like, oh, we're going to crunch forever until the end of time in order to push all of this out. We want to make sure that we're healthy and we're thinking through, and the things that we're delivering are fun and meaningful. And that's for like every major release that we do. Every time that we do a release, we have to ask that question of like, is the thing that we're about to put out, like a fun, meaningful, cohesive game?
I'd agree, and it's definitely a blast working with you here at Intercept.
Thank you.
I'm not just saying that because we're in the same room here and everyone's listening, but it is. There's a whole team here. That was our last question, but I'd like to end this on. Do you have anything you'd like to say to the community? Any motivational words for the people out there?
Oh gosh.
I know I put you on the spot.
Like 100% thank you. As my particular background in game development, my community interactions tended to be towards competitive games. You can imagine what that kind of community is like. They're one of the big drivers for really being excited to work on this project is that this community is spectacular from top to bottom, from every individual piece that everybody does, from every unique story that you have, from every pizza that you decide to take to the mun. Thank you, and I hope we do right by you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I won't bring up cereal today. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your Thursday. And thank you very much for tuning in, and be on the lookout for many more of these to come. We love being able to communicate with our community, and we're always listening to your feedback. So thank you. Thank you, Shana. Thank you to the rest of the community team, because without Dakota, Virginia sitting here beside us, this would not be possible. So have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much.